and all of the places mentioned in scripture are places that I can go visit with my own 2 feet. Like, that was a concept that just did not resonate for me until I went to Israel. Like, we feel more connection to Israel because we've been there. Israel is not just a abstract place anymore. It is real people with real names and real faces and real lives.
The first question, Olivia, I'm going to pitch this one to you first, is Christian support for Israel conditional on Israel's spiritual state or unconditional?
But there are also other things, like, for example, extra biblical things that could potentially cause somebody to have quote unquote anti-Israel views. For example, all of the lies we're seeing about Israel in the media. So teaching biblical literacy, but also media literacy. I think those two things are incredibly important.
There's one more question from Anonymous. I find that the Israel issue can be a stumbling block when introducing non-Christians to the gospel, so I try to wait until they're more comfortable around Christians and hearing the gospel before I reveal my Zionism. Does this strategy sound like it will backfire? Olivia, what do you think?
Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Passages Pulse. So we're doing this a bit differently this week. We'll explain why in a moment, but my name is Josiah McGee, here with my co-host Olivia Lane, who's been traveling again. Olivia, would you like to tell us, where are you now?
I am, drumroll please, in Israel, which I know comes as a complete surprise to everybody watching. I'm super excited to be here.
Great. Welcome back, Olivia, to the podcast. Glad that you are back in Israel safely. And as Olivia just alluded to, we actually have people watching right now. This is a very special episode, our first attempt at a live stream. So welcome to the live audience. We're going to take a stab at a couple of questions we've had waiting in our inbox actually first, and then we will take a look at the Q&A box and see what questions the live audience has. The first question, Olivia, I'm going to pitch this one to you first, is Christian support for Israel conditional on Israel's spiritual state or unconditional?
Ooh, that's a really good question. It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I feel like I get called a Christian Zionist as a slur all the time. Like, it's the connotation behind that phrase. I think it means so many different things to so many different people. And what I usually say to people who use that as sort of a derogatory term is that I'm a Christian and I also happen to be a Zionist. And I say it that way because you obviously don't have to be a Christian to be a Zionist. Operating from that basis would then mean that you'd automatically negate arguments in support of Israel from people that are Muslim, from people that are atheist. Plenty of people I know support Israel that have different religious backgrounds. That being said, I'm also a Christian, and there are plenty of biblical or spiritual reasons to support Israel from a biblical perspective as well. Scripture is obviously clear that we follow a God who doesn't break his covenants. Even when Israel remains unfaithful to their covenant with God, God always keeps his side of the covenant. And obviously, as I'm sure you'll say in your answer, because I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, it's obviously perfectly okay to criticize Israel, to have concerns about things the way you would with any other country, specifically allies of the United States. But no, support for Israel is not conditional upon Israel's spiritual state.
You know, I think this is a great question that we've been sitting on in our email for a while, but I think good to pull out and start the conversation with. One of the reasons why this comes up quite frequently, I think, is that when you have conversations about Christian Zionism, support for Israel, or positive Jewish-Christian relations, the lines tend to get blurred sometimes, and people will sometimes get confused about, are they saying that Jews and Christians believe the same thing? Are they just ignoring the fact that Jews and Christians don't believe the same thing? And I think it's important to just come right out of the gate and say, you know, we need to be clear about this much, that no, Jews and Christians do not actually believe the same thing. That's not what Christian Zionism means, or positive Jewish-Christian relations mean. There are significant theological distinctives about who Jesus is, what is the path to salvation and a right relationship with God. We don't, frankly, believe the same thing that our Jewish friends do as it relates to these issues. If believing the exact same thing was a precondition for support of the Jewish people or the nation of Israel, then no, we would not be able to support the Jewish people until some sort of spiritual reconciliation takes place. However, to your point, Olivia, that doesn't mean that those differences should prevent us from befriending the Jewish people or supporting the nation of Israel. I think I often look to the Old Testament for inspiration, especially books like Hosea. I mean, it's very clear that the story of Israel and the Jewish people throughout
Mm-hmm.
the Old Testament is one in which they were incredibly unfaithful. And yet God was remarkably and I think miraculously faithful to them in contrast, even when they were not. And the New Testament also, Paul does not write off the Jewish people either. One of the passages or chapters that I like to emphasize a lot when we're having conversations like this is Romans 9 through 11, because he describes their spiritual state as a mystery, something that he expects to change in the future without really explaining exactly how that is supposed to work. But at the same time, calling Christians to a good level of honor and respect for our spiritual forebears, despite the fact that there is some division currently between us as far as what we believe. So I think it's a really important question. I'm glad someone had the courage to ask that question, and a good one, I think, to lead off this conversation with. There is, I think, a interesting question in the chat as well from Hannah, a listener named Hannah. We're going to take this question and then we'll pivot back to some of our emailed questions in just a moment, Olivia. But her question is best talking points for Israel advocacy amongst evangelicals who shy away from politics. Olivia, you are pretty active in the Israel advocacy space. So if your Wi Fi is currently working, would you like to take a stab at this question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think the way that I would handle that conversation if somebody asked me that question would be, as a Christian who spends a majority of my time living in Israel, Israel is the only country in the Middle East where I have equal rights as the people around me, where I am treated as a, quote unquote, I obviously am not like a citizen here, but I have religious freedom. I can attend church here, all these other things that I have religious liberty to do that in other countries in the Middle East, I would not be free to do. And where our Christian brothers and sisters in other countries in the Middle East are being persecuted for their faith. And so I would kind of come at it from that angle. There are also plenty of other biblical arguments that you could make as well. But if somebody who is not necessarily, politically active or politically minded is wondering, like, why should I as a Christian support Israel from maybe a belief outside of scripture, I would say it's that they protect the homeland of the Bible. They protect Jesus's home. They protect these historical sites, and also that they protect Christians here who live in the country. And they have historically also acted as a safe haven for Christians who have been fleeing other Middle Eastern countries as well. But I'd be curious to know what your responses would be too, Josiah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of this comes down to you make great points about how you sort of explain Israel outside of political context. I think I would also say that it's going to be challenging to convince someone who doesn't care about politics to care about Israel, even if you make a non political argument, because the conversation is so politicized. It's very difficult to get online on social
Mhm.
media or even in person conversations with your friends and have a conversation that doesn't turn political at some point. So most people are going to be still hesitant. And I think we have to have a conversation then about, okay, why is it important that Christians are involved in politics? Maybe take a step back and think big picture more than just this Israel issue. And for me, I think a big part of it is just the importance of understanding what role responsible citizens have in a republic like the United States. If you don't know the history of the United States and its founding, the framework for its founding, then you're probably not going to understand very well why it is important that you have citizens who are not only informed, but also citizens of virtue. I mean, that was pretty key to the founding fathers that you had to have a class of citizens, a group of citizens, a country made up of people who were informed, who were participatory, who were engaged, but also were virtuous so that they could do the work of preserving a republic like the United States and a system of government like ours. If you look even outside our own country into other contexts like the UK and Great Britain, William Wilberforce was very famous for not just trying to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain, but also carrying out a number of other very big projects. And he was less well known for, but I think just as important a contribution that he made was something that he called sort of this reformation of society or reformation of manners of society. And he basically made the argument that you can't accomplish anything. The government cannot accomplish these big, important things and correct these terrible injustices if they are not held accountable by a citizenry that is inherently virtuous. I think as Christians, we have a unique moral authority, or at least we think we do, because of our beliefs, and we derive what we believe from Scripture, the authority that we believe the Bible has. And if we really believe that the Bible is authoritative and the moral code or values that it lays out are important and authoritative, then we have an obligation, I think, if we want to preserve our system of government and make sure that our government is held accountable to those standards, that we participate in the process. Because otherwise, who else is going to hold the government accountable and make sure that the process is just and moral? So those are what I would say, big picture, about the importance of Christians in politics. And I think you can extrapolate from there why it's important that we also are talking about Israel. I do want to tackle another question from the inbox just very briefly, and then we're going to pivot back to the chat because I see a couple more questions in the Q&A box. One other question we got recently from our email inbox, which I thought was pretty good, was, does support for Israel require a particular end times, otherwise known as eschatological view? Such a fun word, eschatological. And the answer to that question is no, it does not. I think this is a flawed assumption. It's actually pretty common. The debate about Christian Zionism or Christians who support Israel is often sort of a proxy for or a cover for the debate between different eschatology frameworks or interpretations about end times. Dispensationalism is oftentimes front and center. So if you are critical of Christian Zionism, in many cases, it's because you disagree with dispensationalism and you're sort of attributing Christian Zionism to dispensationalism. Ironically, the theological tradition, however, of Christian Zionism, or the theological argument that a modern Jewish state has the right to exist, predates dispensationalism by at least a couple centuries. So they're actually not one and the same. They're just kind of lumped together in many cases, and people mistakenly assume that they are one and the same. I think eschatology certainly informs how some people get there in terms of supporting Israel and its right to exist, but it is not a necessary ingredient if you actually study the history of Christian Zionism. Highly recommend books by a couple people. Donald Lewis has written a great book on this, and Walter Russell Mead. Both of them have written excellent works on the history of Christian Zionism. And it goes back farther than you would think. It is a bit more nuanced than just an end times framework. I think, unfortunately, when you don't keep a healthy separation between the two, end times and Christian Zionism or positive Jewish-Christian relations, the latter, positive Jewish-Christian relations, tends to suffer. Because what winds up happening is that Christian Zionism is basically just reduced to a means to an end of bringing about your preferred sort of style of end times or whatever it may be, and is not treated as an important issue in its own right. So that would be how I would answer that question. I'm going to pivot back to this Q&A box, though. So we have a question from a listener named John. Aside from homeschooling or Christian schooling, what are some recommendations from raising kids to have right understanding of Israel? Well, that's fascinating. You know, as a former homeschooler, John, I appreciate the shout out. I'm not sure that's the only way to raise someone to have a right understanding of Israel, but I do appreciate the love that you're sending us in the chat. I think that really the important thing, and Olivia, I'm going to make sure that you get a chance to also answer this in a sec, is more so just biblical literacy. It's not a guarantee that being raised as a homeschooler or even attending a Christian school necessarily means that you're going to know your Bible really well, but hopefully it does. And if not, then I think that's something that as a parent is really important to emphasize. And I think about this as a parent of young children myself, how to make sure that my children not only know the stories of the Bible, but understand them. I don't want them to just be able to recite them, but actually understand what they mean, understand them as not just individual stories, but pieces of a much bigger story, a much bigger puzzle that is critical to understand. You know, that context is everything. That I think is really the key to understanding Israel today, is understanding the history of Israel and being very, very literate in your Bible and knowing how to read it as one big story, not just individual random stories. But Olivia, do you have anything you want to tag on to that question?
Yeah, as another fellow homeschooler, of course I do. I'm super passionate about this because I really do think that one of the big things, I mean, Josiah, you obviously hit it like perfectly on the head, which is like biblical literacy is definitely something that younger generations are getting less and less of in their churches. And so it's really important for parents to understand that they have maybe potentially a bigger role to fill in their own child's biblical literacy journey. I think that's super important and good for parents to always keep in mind, especially if you're homeschooling. But another thing I'd add on to that is obviously that's incredibly important, but there are also other things like, for example, extra biblical things that could potentially cause somebody to have quote unquote anti Israel views. For example, all of the lies we're seeing about Israel in the media. So, teaching biblical literacy, but also media literacy. I think those two things are incredibly important. And when it comes to media literacy, just like for myself, I took a like college level logic class in high school that was super, super important to help me think critically when it comes to the things that people say about Israel and just in life in general. I found it an incredibly helpful course that I took. So that would be something that I would heavily recommend for anybody that's looking to homeschool their kids, and also something I will definitely do with my kids when I homeschool them. And then another thing is I also did competitive speech and debate as well. And I felt like that was super, super helpful for me because through that process, I learned how to defend certain arguments, how to maybe poke holes in other arguments. What is a credible source? What is an uncredible source? Things like that. Um, Oftentimes in, different forms of education, you may not get as much of that. And that I found to be really, really helpful for me. And obviously, regardless of whether or not you're homeschooling, that's something you can do as an extracurricular through like many different avenues as well.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Speech and debate is also very useful at teaching the critical thinking skills that are very absent in today's society, unfortunately. So I would second Olivia's endorsement of putting your kids in some sort of forensic activity if you have the opportunity to do so. John had a second question. If a university or seminary has academic prestige, but a vocal faculty that leans anti Israel, would you still recommend Christian students enroll there as a counter testimony, or is a migration away from these institutions more prudent? So I kind of did both when I was in school. For my undergraduate degree, I went to a private Christian university. Felt like it was a really good step for me straight out of high school to be around a lot of like-minded people, be around faculty that I trusted to offer me good teaching, not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom as mentors and as spiritual advisors, even not just as teachers of a particular course or subject. And that was great. I think it was the right decision for the right stage of life that I was in at the time. I don't know that that's necessarily what everyone needs to do. And I think it's sort of a case by case decision. But for me at the time, it was the right decision to make. When it came time for my graduate studies, I did something very different, actually. I really leaned into I want to go see what everyone else thinks about these subjects because I had been to Israel several times with passages during my undergraduate career. So for my graduate degree, when I did my master's in global diplomacy in the Middle East in North Africa, I went to the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, which is kind of the polar opposite of a private Christian school in terms of the ideological framework, the makeup of the institution, the friendliness towards Christians and Christianity, the friendliness towards Israel. I mean, it was very, very, very different. At the time, some people kind of looked at me funny, like that was a strange choice to make and maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But I thought it was really very, very important. And the way I explained it then is the same way I would explain it now is, I felt confident about what I believed, confident enough that I was relatively sure I wasn't going to go get my master's degree and come out a totally different person. But at the same time, I realized that I had spent a fairly significant amount of time living in a bubble, and that if I didn't expose myself to the other viewpoints out there, that I wasn't going to be able to effectively engage them because I wouldn't understand them. And it was important to make a good faith effort to understand where people are coming from, why they believe what they believe about Israel, why they are so hostile to Israel, to me at times, my personal beliefs. And what I found was that it actually was a pretty good experience. I mean, I actually had a pretty good time at the University of London. It was remote, so of course I didn't spend a lot of time in person with my classmates, but the engagement that we had, whether it was reviewing each other's papers or spending time studying for a subject or discussing different readings, it was better than I expected. I think it was actually really good for me to have that level of exposure because I came away understanding better what are the real issues that have sort of defined the debate about Israel, the Palestinian conflict today? What are my positions? How do they differ? And where are the real lines of division here? Like the real issues that we need to focus on rather than all of the extra stuff that isn't really the real issue. So I think there's a time and place for both. I think going to a Christian school and insulating yourself a little bit while you figure out what you believe, not a bad idea. It worked fairly well for me, but then also so did intentionally exposing myself to anti-Zionism and pretty hostile ideological frameworks so that I could sort of work out how do my views relate to these and what are the real issues that separate us in terms of what we believe. So I don't know if that answers your question, John. I think it's a case by case. There's pros and cons to both. If you have the opportunity to do both, great. Not everyone does, obviously, but I think you can benefit from both experiences. Olivia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say that I had a similar experience to you, Josiah, in that like my undergrad was in a very friendly environment as far as Israel is concerned. Most of my professors were also pastors and all of them were pretty pro-Israel, and so I never really was exposed to alternative arguments. But I would also say I didn't necessarily even care about Israel until I went to college and I visited Israel for the first time with passages, and also I was taught biblical literacy through my college education. And so I think those two
Mm.
things combined really like sparked my interest in Israel to begin with. And then I'm getting my master's right now in Holocaust and genocide studies. And when I was thinking through like what program do I want to go to for that, I decided on going to a primarily Jewish college. And that for me was really important because if I'm going to be learning about the Holocaust, I want to be in class with peers who have family members who survived the Holocaust. I have Holocaust survivors, the descendants of Holocaust survivors in my classes who are posting their stories in my discussion board and sharing their families' testimonies. And that's something that I just probably wouldn't be able to get at a much larger institution with a different type of program. But I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with going to an institution where they might have some differing viewpoints than you yourself do, because you will get the ability to sort of defend your own arguments and have that practice that, like you said, you wouldn't really get if you were just sticking in your own bubble. But as you also said, I think it really does depend on the person for sure.
Olivia, I'm going to actually make you answer another question before we tackle anything else. What is life like in Israel, Olivia?
Ooh, thanks for asking, Monty. That's such a fun question. It's great. It's so fun. I love it here. I love the energy, like the life here is super fun. There's a lot of young people, which is really interesting. I don't know. I'm not saying there's like not young people where I'm from in like Dallas, Texas, but it just feels like there's more young people here. And I really love the fact that I can just like walk everywhere. I love living in a walkable city. I love the sort of community that I have. Last night I got invited to this like meetup of a bunch of like pro-Israel content creators in Tel Aviv, and that was super fun. We all got to like sit and talk for a long time and share our experiences and meet up and see some like familiar faces that I'd really never met in person before. And that was just super, super fun. And yeah, I have a great time. I love it here. And it's been really fun to spend extended time here outside of just like touring and seeing the typical like classic sites.
Yeah, that's a great question, Monty. Thank you, Olivia, for sharing. I do see a question here from a listener named Irish. Do you have any personal story in sharing to a Jew about Jesus? How did it go? What a loaded question. I mean, that's a good question. It's kind of hard to think how to answer that necessarily, because I think in most cases when I'm having conversations with talking to a Jewish person about Jesus, talking to them about my relationship with Jesus, it's with a friend. So I will be honest, I'm a little bit reluctant to divulge any names or personal details of those friendships because they're people that I consider friends. But I'll speak in generalities about what my experiences are typically like with Jewish friends. I think it's oftentimes more positive than you would think. And it's not because they agree, but it is because when I'm having a conversation with someone about Jesus, a Jewish friend, we have an actual relationship or friendship. So there's a degree of mutual respect and trust that has been earned over time. And sometimes it hurts a little bit when we get to a point where we're forced to just acknowledge we don't believe the same thing. And the consequences that both of us believe are real because of those differences in what we believe, in my case, the eternal consequences, That's painful, and it can be a little bit hurtful sometimes when you reach that point in the conversation. But at the same time, I think because we are speaking from a place where there is, like I said, that foundation of mutual respect and trust, it's okay. The relationship can push through it. It's able to bear the weight of those conversations, and as long as it is clear that it is, not an attempt to coerce them to change who they are just because I want them to, but it comes from a place of me loving them enough to say, we believe different things and here's why. I think in my experience, those conversations have, in the end, been positive, even if there is a bit of awkwardness or pain getting to that point. Olivia, do you want to maybe take any stab at that before we take the next question?
Yeah. I'll just quickly say, especially living here, I don't know. So there's a few things that I'll say that I probably won't say eloquently, but just to kind of like color it a little bit. There's obviously a lot of historical things that Christians have, or people using the name of Christ have done against the Jewish community in history. And so there's a lot of hesitancy when people hear the word Christian in some Jewish spaces. But like you said, when you're talking to people who are your friends and they're also Jewish, I find that the conversation is much more curious. I've had friends who, especially, I have been here for a decent amount of time now. I was here during a chunk of the Iran war, and I get people all the time like, why the heck are you here? Like, have you seen the news? Like, do you know what's going on? And when I share with them, well, like I'm a Christian and I'm here because I love Israel and the Jewish people, and that automatically leads to a curiosity and sort of, well, wait, like what about that makes you different? And I have never been met with any type of resentment from the Jewish community here. Only and ever, curiosity. And yeah, I think it's just something important to keep in mind is that when you approach those conversations from a place of genuine friendship while acknowledging those differences. I mean, I've been at coffee shops in Tel Aviv reading my Bible and had people come up to me and ask what I'm reading, and had cool opportunities to be like, well, this is the Bible and I'm a Christian and this is why I'm reading it. And that kind of conversation always opens up to, well, like, why are you here? And yeah, that's what I'd say about my experiences so far, at least in Israel.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Olivia, for sharing that. We're going to take a fun question first and then another serious question. Anonymous has a question for us. Anonymous listener, what is the best thing to order at Aroma? Olivia, this fun question is for you.
Ooh, okay. So there's this weird thing in Israel where cold and iced coffee are not what you think they are.
Mm,
Iced coffee is blended like a frappuccino, and cold coffee has ice cubes in it, which confuses me every single time I go to a coffee shop, even now. However, the cold coffee that's like blended vanilla coffee that's blended. So good. Also found out, I don't know if you knew this, Josiah. They have the like lemonana, which is like mint lemonade,
hmm
blended at Aroma as well, which I recently discovered on a passages trip. Somebody on our staff was drinking it, and I was like, that looks amazing. What is it? And it was by far the most refreshing drink I've had in probably my whole life, especially in Israel during the summer. I was like, I need 15 of these right now. So that would be my order at Aroma personally now.
It's good. It's good. I'll add one note as well. I don't want to hate on American coffee shops, but the food at them, particularly the big chain retail places who shall remain unnamed, typically pretty subpar. The food at Aroma is actually pretty good. The sandwiches, not bad. The salads, very fresh
Yep.
and very delicious. So if you're back in Israel at
Yeah.
some point, looking for a lunch spot or whatever, they don't just have drinks. They also have some pretty good food that makes the food at American coffee shops look pretty weak. Not going to lie. Okay, we have another question from a listener named Mary. How can we share the Zionist pro Israel message with Christian friends who don't feel a connection to Israel? I found that many don't want to engage because of the hostile environment and anti Israel rhetoric. I think a lot of it is just helping them bridge the gap because it's very difficult for many people to feel as close and as personal a connection to Israel as someone who has been. And not everyone who's listening to this episode recorded it will have been to Israel, but most of the people that I see here attending this live stream have been to Israel previously. So understanding that you have a unique perspective that most people do not, sometimes it's kind of challenging. I mean, I have had moments, especially post October 7, when I've wrestled with, why do my friends not seem to care as much as I do about what's going on over there? And those have been some challenging moments at times. And sometimes have to pull my head out of the sand and remember they just don't have the same type of relationships that I do. I mean, the reason why I care about Israel as much as I do, the reason why I care about my Palestinian friends as much as I do is because I've met them in person. I've spent time in their homes. We have real, meaningful friendships that are not just mediated purely by social media filters. They're real people to me, not abstracts. The pain that they have endured on October 7 and since is something that I can understand in a tangible way that is very hard to do if you're just hearing these stories, on a podcast or on a video or something like that. It's just different. So I think when it comes to bridging that gap, I think most important thing is helping people translate abstract to very real terms, helping them put a face and a name to various issues or stories, helping them connect through you. I mean, you are essentially a mediator in terms of the bridge between your friends and the people in Israel that you care about, because you're the only one who's met both of these people, your friends in the States and your friends in Israel. And your ability to be that personal connection, I think, is pretty key. And that means sharing your own personal story, why you personally care about, who you care about in Israel. I think sharing those things goes a long way to helping the people that are around you in the US care about the kinds of things that you care about. So that's what I would say. Olivia, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, so I think you put it perfectly too, is that you having visited to Israel then can become that sort of bridge for them by sharing your own stories, by sharing your own testimony, by talking about your friends in Israel, by talking about the things you experienced, also by talking about like the biblical sites that you went to. If you happen to be sitting with that Christian friend and scripture comes up in the conversation and you're talking about a specific passage, maybe it's Jesus walking on water, you can say, oh, actually, like I went to the Sea of Galilee in Israel. I saw it for myself. It was such a cool, life changing experience. Sort of making that tie to them, because I think there's a lot of Christians around my age who, and I say this for myself, before I visited Israel, I visited when I was 15, but before then, I really did not read my Bible with any sort of comprehension that Israel is a real place that continues to exist today. And all of the places mentioned in scripture are places that I can go visit with my own 2 feet. Like that was a concept that just did not resonate for me until I went to Israel. So it is kind of a shame, or at least it's unfortunate, that the feel aspect has to be so involved. But there is a
Mm.
reality to that. Like we feel more connection to Israel because we've been there. Israel is not just a abstract place anymore. It is real people with real names and real faces and real lives. And they are directly impacted by the things that happen here. And I mean, that's obviously a huge part of the reason why we do this job, why we're so passionate about it, is because it is people that we really care about. And so, yeah, I would just say really like taking time to be intentionally understanding that you can be the bridge for people who are coming from that place.
Good points. Good points. Okay, we're going to take a look at one or two more questions from the Q&A box. I see a question from Hannah. What school are you attending? I think this question is for you, Olivia.
Yeah, I am attending Gratz College. It's in Pennsylvania.
All right. And there's one more question from Anonymous, it looks like. I find that the Israel issue can be a stumbling block when introducing non Christians to the gospel, so I try to wait until they're more comfortable around Christians in hearing the gospel before I reveal my Zionism. Does this strategy sound like it will backfire? Olivia, what do you think?
Hmm. I totally see where this person is coming from, and I can definitely see why the hesitancy would be there, especially in a place where we're at today where like everything is so political and there's so much hostility. And also like it's worth recognizing that when you are vocally pro-Israel, you will there's usually a like some type of social cost that comes with that. As unfortunate as it is. Like I have lost friends over this, like close friends that I've known for a majority of my life, and that's worth acknowledging that it's not an easy thing to talk about all the time. But that being said, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Josiah, because I'm sure you'll say it more eloquently than I could. I think that whenever I have that hesitancy, or I think to myself, like, is now really like obviously time and place for everything, and you want to like prayerfully consider like what to bring up and what to maybe not bring up. Times where maybe you need to be a little bit louder, and maybe you need to like consider how to approach something and what tone to use. But there have been a couple times where I have thought to myself, like, maybe I shouldn't speak about a specific issue, or maybe I should, like slim down the Israel messaging in like this specific topic. And something that I come back to that, and I'm not saying this in any way to make the person who asked this question feel bad, this is something I've wrestled with as well, is that I never want to be ashamed of the place or the people that Jesus came from. Like the Jewish people are Jesus's family. And I never want to be sharing the gospel with somebody and be ashamed of that. And the reality is, like, the gospel is going to be offensive regardless of whether or not you include the pro Israel aspect of it or the Zionist aspect of it, or even just not the pro Israel aspect of it at all, just talking about where the Bible took place, which is in the land of Israel. I think it's going to be offensive regardless. And so to me, like, why try and make it less offensive in the moment when if that person is, anti-Israel for whatever reason, it will only be offensive then later on. But that's my opinion right off the bat. But I would love to hear what you would think about it too, Josiah.
I mean, I think, Olivia, I agree. It's hard without some additional context to speak to whatever particular situation this person might be thinking of. I think these kinds of conversations require wisdom and discernment. There's not necessarily a one size fits all answer to that question for every situation. I would say, to your point, it is important to be important to be aware of the offense that can be taken when you are open about the fact that you support Israel, but also to not be embarrassed about it. And I think there comes a point where you don't want to present yourself as something that you are not. And then after you have, quote unquote, converted your friend, reveal yourself to be someone different and then than who they thought you were. And now they feel like there's sort of this bait and switch that's taken place. And there could still be some very real offense in that situation. So I think you want to be careful. I mean, you don't want to intentionally antagonize someone with your Zionism, but at the same time, hiding it and pretending like you're someone that you are not doesn't really sound like it's going to work out well either. Finding the balance and managing those tensions in terms of when you introduce different subjects, like I said, I think really requires a bit of discernment and ability to read each individual situation, read the room before deciding when to say certain things. I also think, Olivia, you made a really good point that the background of who Jesus is, he was a Jewish person. His audience when he was teaching was a Jewish audience. And so if you're pretending like they don't matter or that context doesn't matter, and it is going to be very difficult to explain to your friend what is the gospel and what did Jesus really mean when he spoke especially in parables. I mean, he was speaking in riddles essentially that only a Jewish audience was going to understand. And if you're ignoring that for the sake of not offending someone, then you're watering down, I think, the truth of the gospel and of his teaching in ways that, I mean, yeah, it might be offensive to talk about how much you care about the Jewish people or why they matter, but better to offend than to teach someone that is not true about Jesus and who he was or what he had to say. We'll take just a couple more questions and then wrap this up. Anonymous has a question. Aside from Liv Lane and Josiah McGee, are there any other pro-Israel influencers you recommend? Did not realize I was an influencer. Pretty sure Olivia is. Didn't think I was, but I appreciate that. Shout out from Anonymous. Olivia, you really actually spend a lot more time in the influencer space than I do. I'm basically never on social media. So do you want to answer that question? I think you're better equipped than I am.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, Josiah, you're my influencer. So, I mean, everybody knows that I go to you for like so many questions on the back end. So there's that. That's worth noting. For people that are on social media, however, there's definitely a lot of people. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. The few that I know in person that I really like their informational content. That opinionated girl, she's really good. The moderate case, also a really good person to follow. At some point, maybe I should just put together a list and like put it on my Instagram story. So it might be a little bit easier. But there's definitely a lot of people in the community or in like the pro-Israel community. Unfortunately, the like sort of Christian quote unquote influencer community is pretty small. more often than not, you'll see, Jewish pro-Israel content creators or things of that nature. But there are definitely several really good, awesome, solid Christians who love Israel and who have made content a huge priority in their lives that I really find helpful personally.
Yeah, that's great. There is a question from our listener named Hannah. This space can be incredibly lonely, and even those who have been to Israel may not feel supported enough to face such a controversial topic alone. Are there strategies for providing the support/ community to help folks who care about Israel find the boldness to start speaking out? Olivia, you want to start?
Yeah, actually, first of all, Hannah, I'm just gonna speak to you directly, even though I can't see your face. I'm really sorry that that is happening to you and that's the situation you find yourself in. And I say that because I've also experienced the exact same thing. I remember when I first started, especially talking out on social media, even after October 7th, before I even said anything on social media. But when I first started really posting consistently, I had a conversation with my mom where I said the words to her, like, this is the loneliest I've ever been in my life. Because the reality is, standing in hard spaces where you're really having to say things that go against majority opinion is never easy, even when you know it's the right thing to do. I was like, I'm never going to change my opinion just because I'm lonely, but man, it's really lonely. So I just wanted to acknowledge that you're not alone in feeling that loneliness, that there are other people out there who can, myself included, really relate to what that feeling is like because it does affect your life. As far as strategies, I'm currently working on that. I would love for there to be some way to sort of help people who are pro Israel, especially those who maybe want to be a little bit bolder in speaking online, for them to have maybe some sort of built in network so that they can maybe feel a little bit less lonely. That's been a goal of mine for a really long time, ever since I felt that loneliness. And I'd say, just on a personal level, finding a really good church community of like minded believers who also support Israel and also have a heart for the Jewish people. It's really difficult to find, unfortunately, in a lot of Western churches, but there are churches out there. And that can be really, really helpful. And also, as cheesy as it sounds, I have plenty of people who are, pro Israel who I've only ever met on social media, who I now have the opportunity to meet because a lot of them live here, but have had to reach out to them and really look for that community myself, which obviously is not an easy thing to do. Having to, the mental energy required to having to go out and sort of seek those friendships out, especially when not all of them may be able to have that in-person connection, is really, really difficult. But really, in order to maintain longevity, especially in a space where you're speaking out on social media or even just in your personal life, you're not meant to be an island. You have to do this with other people. So that's a very natural thing for you to feel and for anybody else to feel. And it just takes a lot of time and effort and intentionality in sort of seeking those friendships out.
Don't have a whole lot to add to that, Olivia. I think that's all really good, and I appreciate your honesty and what your experience has been like, and willingness to share that. I'll just make one shameless plug. I mean, Passages as an organization, this is kind of what we're trying to do, is build that community of people who have a shared experience and understand in ways that it's hard to explain to other people, in terms of why we have such a strong connection to Israel, the people who live there. And if you are not actively plugged in to our alumni community, would definitely encourage you to just look for different opportunities that we have available. There is things like our DC Impact Summit coming up this fall in September. We also have hubs in different major American cities around the country where you can gather in person with other people who have shared an Israel experience and they know what it's like, and would be, I'm sure, like you, looking for people who get it and some kind of community. So you can feel free to check the show notes for most episodes. We when we have updates, we'll put things in there about upcoming opportunities. We'll try to put something in this week's episode about the upcoming DC Summit. And also you can email alumni@passagesisrael.org. They've got a ton of opportunities, the alumni team. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you more about that. And I think we're gonna call that a wrap on this episode. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, all those fun things. And Lindsay, thank you for producing this in the background. Last but not least, Olivia, thank you very much for jumping on again today, just after getting back to Israel. It's good to see you. And we will hope to see you all again next time we do this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Passages seeks to prepare and empower a new generation of Christian leaders who love God, stand with the Jewish people, and support Israel. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit www.passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep you connected to the Pulse.